This is the first in a series of videos on how to improvise using the minor pentatonic scale. The picture in front of you is a representation of the minor pentatonic scale laid out over the entire length of the fretboard. So it'd be kind of a daunting task to learn the entire scale pattern in one sitting. So for practical purposes, we break the scale down into 5 chunks or boxes. We identify each box by its position in ascending order relative to the root note of the scale. In other words, the first box, or position 1, begins on the root note of the key you want to play in, and the subsequent box patterns follow from that first position. If you feel like what I've just said is over your head, keep watching, and by the end of the video, I promise this is all going to make sense. So as I said, when learning the minor pentatonic scale, we break it into smaller chunks and learn each of those chunks individually, incorporating each new chunk with the one that we previously learned. In this video, I focus on the first chunk, position 1, sometimes called box 1 of the minor pentatonic scale. So on the screen in front of you is a representation of position 1 of the minor pentatonic scale on the fretboard. You can find a link below this video to download this picture, and I highly recommend doing that, as I've not filmed this with the intention of having you learn the pattern solely from watching me. So if you look back at the intro of the video, pay close attention to where my fingers are positioned on the fretboard. You should notice that I'm locked into a space between the 3rd and 6th frets. All the notes I'm playing are in that space, and that is because I intentionally chose to use only the first position of the minor pentatonic scale for my solo. As you can see, there's a lot you can do with just one position of this scale, but simply memorizing position 1 of the scale is not going to be enough to get you to the point where you can solo fluently with substance over a chord progression. But it is the first step if that's your goal. So let's take a look at position 1 of the minor pentatonic scale by playing it in ascending and descending fashion on the guitar. Here I'm playing the G minor pentatonic scale in position 1. It's the G minor pentatonic because I've started from the 3rd fret of the low E string, which is the G note. This scale pattern is movable, meaning that if I want, for example, to play the position 1 A minor pentatonic scale, I simply play the same scale pattern, but I start from the 5th fret of the low E string, which is the A note. This is what we're talking about when we refer to a root note. It's the lowest note in the scale that matches the key that you want to play in. The root note of the G minor pentatonic scale is G, specifically the G note that is found at the 3rd fret of the low E string. I recommend practicing this pattern on the guitar in ascending and descending fashion, over and over again until you have it memorized. And remember, practice slow. If you're just learning this scale, I suggest playing it even slower than I'm playing it here to start. Certainly not faster. If you try to play too fast too soon, you risk developing poor habits that become cemented in muscle memory. This leads to sloppy playing that, once ingrained as a habit, can become very difficult to fix. So let's look at the picking hand. Notice that my pick is moving in a down-up pattern. This is called alternate picking. I found that this is the most economical way to pick. When you come across complicated and fast pieces of music, it may not be physically possible to play them without employing the use of this picking technique. Keep that in mind when you practice. If you aren't comfortable picking this way already, this may be a good time to start. Also notice that when I pick these strings, my wrist stays straight and my arm doesn't move. My goal is to move anything behind my knuckles as little as possible. I want the majority of the picking motion to be taking place at the level of my fingers. I could still use some practice with my technique, and I'm not claiming that what you're seeing here is perfect. I just want to point out that this is something to pay attention to, and that your playing will improve greatly if you work on developing your picking technique, even just a little. Again, Practice this scale over and over until you get it memorized. If you only have 5 minutes a day to do it, then practice it for 5 minutes every day. By the end of a week, you'll have it memorized. Once memorized, start practicing over the top of chord progressions. If you can find a 1-4-5 blues progression, that's even better, as this scale really lends itself to that progression. Below this video, you'll find a link to download a 1-4-5 progression in the key of G that you can use to solo over. If you're just getting started with improvisation, I would spend as much time as you can soloing over backing tracks or over progressions played by other musicians. It takes hours and hours of repetition and practice to be able to speak with your guitar and to say what you want to say musically on demand. So to wrap up, I just want to point out a note that you should pay special attention to. In the key of G, it's the C note that falls on the 5th fret of the G string. This is a great note for bending. It always sounds great when you bend this note in a solo if you're in the proper key. If you've never practiced bending, there are a couple of things to take into consideration. When learning to bend, it's easier if you use more than one finger to bend a note. To practice bending the C note at the 5th fret of the G string, start by placing your index finger on the 3rd fret of the G string, your middle finger on the 4th fret of the G string, and your ring finger on the 5th fret of the G string. Press down with all 3 fingers, pick the G string with your pick hand, and pull the string toward the ceiling while pressing down with all 3 fingers. You can also bend in the opposite direction, pushing the string toward the floor while pressing down with all 3 fingers. Sometimes which way you bend is a matter of preference. Other times it may depend on functional considerations. For example, it might be easier to play certain riffs if you bend in a certain direction. So here's a fairly simple riff that includes a bend. This is played on the G and D strings. The tablature for the riff is on the screen in front of you. It can also be downloaded by following the link below. I'll play this several times so you get the feel of it. Thanks for checking out my video. I hope you found this helpful. You'll look for more videos in the coming weeks and months. Also, feel free to email me any questions or comments. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below. Thanks again.